Welcome to the Wisdom Jacob's Ladder. I'm your host, Jacob Cooper, best-selling author of The Wisdom Jacob's Ladder and Life After Breath. Today's guest on episode number 11 is Allison DuBois. I'm going to introduce and talk about Allison in just a moment, but for those of you who are new to my channel, The Wisdom Jacob's Ladder, we love having you on. Please make sure to hit that subscribe button and hit that bell notification icon to get up-to-date videos and interviews coming your way. On my channel we talk all things higher consciousness, and we try to evolve and grow together. You could also find us in addition on YouTube, on Spotify and iTunes, and many other channels as well. But let's get to it. Today's episode number 11, which for those of you in numerology really is one of my life path numbers. Number 11 represents a very high vibratory number, a master number, if you will. And today we have an incredible master of all things healing, wisdom, insight, mediumship. I say they make superheroes, and they make Allison DuBois, because as you'll see in just a few moments, Allison does it all. Allison DuBois is a New York Times best-selling author who has published six books in several languages popular worldwide. She inspired the NBC and CBS hit television show Medium. It ran for 7 seasons and is still watched by millions of people around the world, including me. She conducted live seminars around the world for 18 years, bringing through departed loved ones for the audience. Currently, Allison hosts the Dead Life podcast. With this show, she looks at life after death and all things ethereal through the lens of guests from different walks of life. Without further ado, I bring on Allison DuBois. Welcome to the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. It is my true pleasure having you on. How have you been?
I'm good. Thank you for the invite. I've been busy, but good.
Good things. Now, I know you've had quite an impact. Many people, you've shattered so many glass ceilings and have made, such an impact. But my channel, we really like to get to the beginning. And I know our paths, as children, have a lot of common ground. So take me through when, you knew a little bit about your intuitive gifts and how those unfolded for yourself. Like, take us through like how it all began for you.
I guess the first poignant moment was when I was 6 and I went to my first funeral. So, you only have the reference of a 6-year-old. My great grandfather had passed and he was in the casket. And when I didn't feel well, my mom would put me down for a nap. So I thought maybe, he was sleeping. I didn't understand why everybody was crying. I hadn't really experienced death much at that point. I was 6. So my mom brought me home and she put me in bed and tucked me in, and she went to her room. And I looked at the foot of my bed and my great grandfather was standing there, and he didn't have any pain on his face. There were no lines. And he said, "Tell your mom I'm not in pain anymore and I'm still with her." So I was kind of excited. I thought he was better. I jumped out of bed. I knocked on her door. I went in and I just said, "Mom," and I gave her the messages, and she just looked at me and said, "Go back to bed." And so I went back to my room and he was gone. So I was very confused as to if he was really there, why my mom had such a visceral reaction to me being in there. But being an adult, I guess, if you're grieving, you're mourning, that maybe having somebody stand at the foot of your bed and tell you something like that, being your child, being me, that could have been something she wasn't prepared to respond to. So I don't know, but that's really the first poignant moment. But I do remember being around 4, and there was a motorcycle accident in front of our house, and I picked up his shoe because it had flown off, and I couldn't see where he was. He was down the road, and my mom went down there to see what was happening, and I just started burying his shoe. I don't know why. It was just instinctual, but knowing who I am now, I guess that was a bad sign.
Hmm. Well, I mean, I'm wondering, for like a 6-year-old child, and I know you went to a parent, and normally we associate parent with knowing more things than us. But for you, like, was there someone that you could talk to, like, when this did happen? Like, how was that like for you when you were having, these experiences occurring?
You know, when you're that little and your mom, who you're the closest to still because you're just a little more than a baby at that age,
Mm.
um, has that kind of reaction, you're not really in a hurry to share it with anyone else. And you really do question whether or not what you saw in the first place and if you saw it in the second place. So, yeah, it was confusing. I did have my grandma Jenny. My grandma Jenny always knew when people were going to die.
Mm.
So I would talk to her as I was growing up about things I was experiencing, but I only talked to her until I became a teenager. And then my friends just chalked it up to that's just Allison. She knows things. So, they were teenagers. They had no other reference. So to them, I just knew things, and that's what it was.
Was it? I mean, I don't know if you ever seen the movie with Matt Damon, kind of like the Hereafter, when he had a gift and he just kind of wanted to be a part of this world and he just kind of pushed it away. Did you have a part of that in your life? And if so, like, what allowed you to, embrace this? Was there a turning point for you?
It's interesting that you'd mentioned that movie because I'm actually, this will age me, on the trailer for the DVD set.
Oh,
They
wow, wow.
interviewed me for that. Um, so I would say I always just knew it was part of me. I thought everybody could do it. People just didn't want to talk about it. So I didn't expect that I was different in that
Mm.
way because it's all I knew. But I think it would have to be, in my 20s when I started talking to Joe about it. And then I went to a laboratory to be studied by scientists to prove that what I was doing was average so I could go back to law school. And I was testing really, really well.
Mm.
And then they coined me the Michael Jordan of mediums. And so the rest is history. I would say the really what striking moment that stands out for me though is when I was 17, I was going to a party with my friend Barbara,
Mm.
and I took my bed and I moved it from the south wall to the east wall. And she
Mm.
said, "Why did you do that?" And I said, "That voice told me to move the bed." So I moved the bed. And she was like, "You're so weird." And then we went to a party because we were teenagers and had to get in trouble like most teenagers do, and came home and went to sleep. And at about 3 in the morning or in the middle of the night, a truck drove through my bedroom wall. And we actually have a really good picture of it, a few good
Hmm.
pictures of it. And where I had moved my bed from was where the truck came through. So we would have been under the truck, and there's no way that we would have survived because the truck came all the way into the room. Where I moved the bed was the only place that we would have survived.
So intuition, in other words, to you isn't just helpful, it literally saved your life, listening to
Yes.
that inner voice. And
Yes.
I know for you, you worked a lot in like homicidal detective work, and we'll get into the show Medium a little bit, but there was also one story that I read in your book in which someone it was kind of like approaching you, and that voice kind of told you to just not entertain that. Like, take us through a little bit about why you ventured into working with homicidal detectives and what personal story might have been the impetus of that a little bit.
So when I was in the fifth grade, I was watching TV,
Mm.
and there was a made for television movie that came on called Adam.
Mm.
And it was about the little boy Adam, 6 years old. His dad went on to host America's Most Wanted. And I had never thought of something so horrible that somebody would do something like that to a child. And that's when I decided I wanted to be a prosecutor, which, trust me, my great uncles gave me limitless hell for. I'm like, I'm
Mm.
going to put bad guys away. It's okay. They're like, don't be one of those shyster lawyers. I'm like, I'm going to be one of the good ones. And so that set me on a path to want to be a prosecutor. Was that when
Mm.
I was 11, so this is around the same time, I was riding my bike home, and I lived in a cul-de-sac. And so
Mm.
I'm getting ready to turn the corner, and this old car pulled up with two sort of scraggly looking
Mm.
guys. in it, and the window was down, and they said, "Want to go for a ride?" And I said, "I live around the corner." They said, "We'll drive you home." So a voice inside of me said, "Go." Because I was in shock. I was just, every, fiber of my being felt threatened. This is not good. Something bad's going to happen. And the images of my house were being flashed through my mind over and over again. And I just heard, "Go." And so I took off on my bike and I went home, and I told my mom what happened. And she did what the majority of parents do whose children tell them they were approached by a stranger and they don't report it. So, that was a very pivotal moment for me.
Mm.
It ended up bringing me to my first real case, which I went to Texas for, which is the pilot episode of Medium. And the Texas Rangers and the Tarrant County Sheriff showed up to the airport and picked me up. And it was actually for a missing little girl, not a boy, like they had on the show. They had to change some of the details to not re-injure the victims and their families. So that's when I happened to be writing with a sheriff who told me about a thing called the Amber Alert, which they only had there at the time. I think it was in San Diego and in Fort Worth at the time. And so I came back to Arizona and I was like, I want to enact this for Arizona. So it set me on a pilgrimage, if you will, to make it real for my state. And I jumped through a lot of hurdles, but I got it done, and I sat on the task force to design it, and I got the age raised to 17 from 15 using Molly Bish, the lifeguard that disappeared, and she was obviously assaulted and murdered. And she was 16. I said, "You wouldn't have enacted it for her." And I said, "Not all 16-year-olds are runaways." So they raised it to 17. I'm still very proud of that.
Wow, you just have done so much for so many families. And a big theme of my channel is the pain defining or segue to our purpose. And I'm sure that traumatic event, as scary as it was for you, put you on this path of purpose. But in working with all these detectives, I could imagine as a medium, that's a lot of, negative energy to take in. You're taking in, I know, I'm sure you have an investigatory side and stuff like that, but for you, it's a lot to take in. But what kind of allowed you to propel? What was, just that lasting image that drove you to continue to work with the sheriffs? Because it is a lot energetically to take on those cases.
I was going to be a prosecutor anyways. It was my job to sort the crime scene photos to go to court. So I already was built to be able to look at crime scene photos, but I also could see what was happening before the person was killed. I could feel the motive. I'd get an impression of the person. When it came to Elizabeth Smart, for instance, the name Brian stood out.
Wow.
Connected to the perpetrator. Now, that didn't help because he was going by some biblical name at the time, but his real name was Brian David Mitchell. So because he was a drifter, it's not helpful necessarily. But for me, I was like, I gave you his name. What do you want? And, there was a good spoof on Mad TV years ago where they did a spoof on Medium, and it has my character saying, I map quested it, like, here, this is where you go. And I wish it was that easy, but it's not. You get impressions, you pull images, you get maybe a name or a street name, what the house looks like the person lives in. But the motive, I find, and feeling the motive is the most important part of that. Working with detectives wasn't that hard for me because most of my girlfriends are cops and homicide DAs. So I was used to their energy. I know how skeptical they are. I know that they take these cases personally. They take them home with them. But I could also feel their skepticism when working with them. And I just had to navigate it. If I ever felt like they really were completely closed, I didn't see it as a door I could walk through because they're not going to do anything with the information anyways. And I teach young profilers now, this is the most thankless path you could take. People will always question whether or not it's real. I didn't accept money for working cases for 20 years. That was my way of giving back to the universe, if you will. So my way of saying thank you for blessing me with all these other opportunities. and you take it home. So January 2nd can't roll around for me without me thinking of like Mikkel Biggs, who was 11 years old when she was abducted and murdered. So all these dates start sticking in your head, and the details of the crimes and who you know did it, but they can't prove did it. I have a lot of faith in the police that good old fashioned detective work is usually going to get you where you need to go. You just want it to be expedited because you don't want more victims. But I also know, and I'm sure you do too, there's a reason behind everything. Certain people are supposed to find the body for a reason. It changes their life. It not necessarily will be me. So I do have a lot of faith in the other side, but I do the best. I did the best I could for 20 years. I watched all my girlfriends retire from law enforcement, and I looked at Joe and I said, I want to retire. I don't want to do this forever. It wasn't what I had set out to do, and it's really hard to enjoy your family when the details filling your head are always about such horrific crimes. It makes it hard to sleep. It makes it hard to function normally as a person. My daughters, if they wanted to spend the night at someone's house, I had to know the parents really well for them to spend the night at their house. Otherwise, I'd say, let's have the sleepover at our house, because those children could not be any safer than they would be under my watch. So I knew what could happen. I knew a lot of children disappear on their street, and you just never know where it's at. So I lived as though a pedophile lived next door, and that's how we lived our lives. But my girls are here and they're safe. So I don't regret that. But I also tried to teach other parents and children, once you're abducted, how do you get away? So a long time ago when I was in college, I did a video on how to avoid and survive child abduction. It was called Taking Back Our Children. So I made that video on how you can get away once you've made the mistake of approaching the car, for instance. Like you hold onto your bike frame so they can't pull you through the window. They have to drop you, get out of the car, and try and go around. It buys you some time. So I just tried to teach kids to be a little bit smarter to survive.
So just primal defense, not just I know you work with kids on psychic stuff, which we'll,
Right.
get into, but just, I know I work as a therapist and I see this stuff, and especially in the summertime happening. And I feel parents really need to be educated on how kids could defend themselves when they are just walking down the street, and what to look out for, what are the signs,
Right.
because it could be a make or break,
And
so.
you'd be surprised with children once you give them the tactics on how to defend themselves and how to get out of that scenario. They remember it. They're smart. They're sponges. They absorb everything. And I remember the first girl that got away from an abduction out here when she was like one of the first Amber Alerts that went out. And she said, I saw this video and it taught me, told me to like pull the keys and throw them, away from the car. And she said, I did that and I was able to get away. So just knowing that, it was all worth it. No matter what else came from it, just knowing if I hadn't done it at that time for Arizona, that girl may not be here. So I feel very, I don't even know how to, I feel like I have this light on me waiting for me to act at all times and see what's going to happen. And I always felt a little under the gun, if you will, to, bring the results and to do better and to make things safer and to protect. And so I've always had that in me. So I figure since I've got the spotlight, I might as well use it to help other people. And that's what I did with the Amber Alert. And so it's not just psychic work. I went, the route of citizen in helping to get that going here. And then they made it a national thing so that every state would have it, which is great. And it's named after Amber Hagerman, that was a little girl that was abducted, raped, and murdered in Texas. And I think a lot of people don't know that. And I think that should be something that people remember. It does happen. It doesn't happen to just somebody else's child. They thought it happened to somebody else's child. It could be your child, and you've got to make your kids smart. You don't have to scare the hell out of them, but you have to make them smart.
I truly admire that about you because in this field, everyone wants to just talk about the good and love and light. And for you, these are real things. These are unfortunate life on life's terms things that are happening, and you're able to roll up your sleeves and go there and help out. Some of these families. It may not change the horrific circumstance, but if it perhaps provides a tad bit of closure, that may be helpful for these families.
I
Back.
do bring a lot of children through for their parents, a lot of children that were murdered through
Mhm.
for their parents. I'd rather save a child by teaching them what to do so that it never happens,
Mhm.
so that those parents don't need that reading.
Yeah.
So I work it from both ends and help where I can.
Yeah, I mean, from my standpoint, I was in Israel for a summer, like around 2000 area, and I visited a friend, who just moved to Israel, and I gave him a hug. And after I gave him a hug, I just felt something. I remember just being in the car with my parents and saying something is going to happen to this boy. I can't, And then he took us to the caves where he, was then a year later on the front page of the New York Times, and he was unfortunately murdered. And I guess my question is how much of this is something that we're supposed to act on versus how much of this is like, just their path that we can't stop? Are these things, fate or free will? Like, how much could we prevent these horrific acts from occurring?
If it's not set in stone that a person is supposed to die, and I can feel the difference if it's set in stone or if there's movement where you can try and buffer them or interject. I think most psychics need to recognize that just because what you experience, getting the flashes of a memory of his or seeing what you were seeing connected to him, doesn't mean you were supposed to necessarily save him. It's
Mm.
the other side saying, be prepared for this.
Mm.
So when it comes to where you're supposed to help those people, the right people are put into your path
Mm.
to make that possible. And if I'm not the right person, I always pray, to the other side to make sure that somebody's presented who does have the power to help that victim or the missing child, so that if it's possible that they come back alive. And I've worked cases where they were found alive. They're not always
They're
killed.
not always, yeah.
But I did have to learn all the statistics making, the video that I had created, which I need to redo and re-release because technology has changed things drastically. But I just, yeah, I need to do that. It's important. It's just if people know the tactics and how, and adults can use it as well, and you trust your instincts, you're always going to fare better. And this goes for women too. When you go to get into your car and there's a van parked next to you, get in on the passenger side. Like go around and get in on the other side. I always tell my girls, lock your door as soon as you get into the car, because often they'll come up and just throw your door open and push you over. So there's just little things that you need to do that really can help to save your life in these situations. And instincts are a big one. It's the other side trying to give us a heads up, just as they do with you, with your friend who passed, trying to give you a heads up that something was going to happen. It doesn't mean you could have prevented it. It just means they were making you aware that that was the case. So I've had readings where I'd say, buckle your seatbelt, and they laughed at me. And then the woman left and she rolled her car on the freeway, but she had put her seatbelt on and she survived. So sometimes we can intervene for them, and the other side uses living people almost as chess pieces to try and protect those that can be saved when there's movement for them to stay. But sometimes it's set in stone, like it was for my dad, where the other side said, your dad's going to die at 67 of a massive heart attack. So I spent 2 years sending him to heart specialists and trying to prevent it, even though he was a professional ballroom dancer for 50 years and he was in great shape. I mean, my dad was in great shape. And everybody thought I was crazy. And he died at 67 of a massive heart attack. He never had heart problems. And the heart specialist, the cardiac specialist, said they didn't see any signs of heart disease. So I had the medical examiner send me the report because I had to see it. And it just said clear signs of heart disease. So, for whatever reason, my dad had to pass so I could understand my clients and their loss. But also my dad's passing inspired other children to be able to relate to me through the chapters I've written about him. so that I can do the work more effectively.
Yeah, I didn't know, correct me if I'm wrong, he was like a dance instructor. Is that kind of it? Was he, and I think like at his funeral, a lot of his students came, so I'm sure he's so proud of you, which,
Oh,
I know right now you're the head professor of, Dead University and just doing kind of the stuff that he did, just in a different style and role. And I'm sure he works with you as an educator, for
He
what you
he
do.
he does. In my readings, I always say, Dad, I need you to turn up the volume and focus their energy so he can work from the other side with the dead that I'm bringing through so that they come through more clearly.
Mm,
He owned a couple of ballroom dance studios.
yeah.
The Regency Dance Studio, that was my dad's. And I
uh,
grew up in his studios. So I grew up learning ballroom. I was a competitive roller skater in the 80s, and he's like, do ballroom. I'm like, I don't want to. I want to roller skate. I was always that adverse, rebellious kid. And now, of course, after he passed, I did like a charity event that was like a Dancing with the Stars, and I got to wear an outfit that they wore in one of the TV shows for that show. And I danced for him. So that was my tribute to him, because he could never get me to dance unless it was with him at like a family party. But
I'm sure he got a kick out of that to see it from his end, finally. Yeah.
I'll never wear red spandex again.
Noted. Noted.
Very humbling, very
Yeah.
humbling.
Yeah. Now, your kids seem to all have it seems like something in the family where everyone has something special. I mean, Joe, is an aerospace engineer and he's, getting his doctorate, and you have your thing, and all your kids have something special, but they're also, correct me if I'm wrong, they all have a little bit of that intuition.
Yeah,
And I know even Joe is starting to shift throughout the years, it seems. But
he has.
for yeah, for parents, raising kids, what kind of tidbits or advice? I know, you incorporate a lot of this, in your courses. But if you could give like, just a couple of bullet points for parents to really allow your kids to blossom their own intuition and just, properly allowing them to unfold. I think there are a lot of, especially today, narcissism is very high. People just want to
Yeah.
self-replicate their own and not, accept the fact that you could have a child who's totally different than you, and being able to embrace and accept that. So, give us some tips for some parents, because I work in the psychiatric hospital for kids, and I'm just trying to find ways to not reinvent the wheel, but allow just more conscious parenting, to occur.
I just created a children's course. It's a video course for deaduniversity.com, and it gives like the little
Mm,
homework assignments to the
mm,
parents to do with their children, because I think since it's genetic and it runs in families, and I always tell people with abilities, I'm like, if your parents are uncomfortable with it, just look at them and be like, this is your fault. It's your
mm,
DNA. It's not my
mm,
fault. Accept it. So the course is set up for 3 years through 15-year-olds.
mm,
And I think the important part is to get the parents involved so that they could go, when I was 5, I had that happen. They can start relating to the child
mm,
instead of seeing the child as on their own path. Maybe it's a shared path that the parent has. Some of the tips that I gave have to do, especially with bedtime, especially with the
mm,
small ones. I call them kindergarten mediums, because between 4 and 6, they're particularly powerful because they've learned how to
mm,
communicate, but they're still very open to the other side because the world hasn't jaded them yet. They're
mm,
not worried about peer pressure. They're still sort of at home more with their parents, where they tell them everything and they trust their parents. So bedtime is really important. I remember my mom always closed the door to my room and it was dark. And when that happens, a psychic mind and a mediumship mind will start probing the room. So they're actually opening themselves up to the other side because they're locked in this dark room in a sense, where they don't feel the connection with their parent. Leave the door cracked open so they can feel that energy connection with the parents. It makes them feel
mm.
safe. I have an Alexa, but for people that don't, you could use something else, but they need soothing sounds. And this is for any sensitive out there. I say, play Zen Spa. Alexa, play Zen Spa.
Mm.
And she plays the music that puts you to sleep on the table when you're getting a massage. We know this as adults. And we're like, it's so soothing. So I
Mm.
play that and it distracts the part of my brain that would probe the room or what's around me. That's basically sending out a signal to the dead, I'm open for business.
Mm.
Which is why kids have so many interactions at bedtime. They're not even asleep. They're just feeling it swirl around them in their room, and they feel isolated, and they're afraid often to get up and tell their parents, because often the parents, like my mom did, go back to bed.
Mm.
Now, I was an unusual child. I felt a little lonely. I didn't really relate and connect to the living as much. I
Mm.
actually really liked the dead in my room because they kept
Mm.
me company as a little girl. And I know that
Wow.
sounds weird to your listeners. So I'd set up areas in the room where they'd show up and it would catch me off guard. I'd put like a big teddy bear or a big stuffed elephant. And then that occupied that space in the room. So I wasn't caught off guard because they had to sort of find a different area of the room where I had that focus. It was in my main line of vision.
Mm.
I didn't like being caught off guard. So I fixed that as a child. See how smart kids are? And, and, but I'd have these old men that played poker and they had suspenders on and the funny little hats and the bushy mustache and the spectacle glasses. And they just sit there and play poker while I played with my tea set or my
Mm.
dolls. And it made me feel comfortable because they felt like grandparents. And I think they were drawn to me, not just because I could see them, but they miss their own grandchildren. And I
Mm.
just reminded them of their grandchildren or their children. And so they sort of made me feel protected, like they were there for a reason. So it didn't bother me. But for other kids that aren't me,
Mm.
most of them seem to be afraid of the unknown. And so that's why the sounds distracting that part of their brain so they can sleep helps a lot. And
Mm.
leaving the door cracked open. A nightlight gives them a focus, something to look at that makes them feel connected to light can
Mm.
be very important as well. And I know all these things seem easy, but there's very important reasons behind why children need that. Another thing that's underestimated, animals. Let the dog or the cat sleep with the child. The animal, their familiar, if you will, their little psychic connection animal makes them feel calm. And I find this with all children, whether it's a teen that's going through a hard time at school and feeling misunderstood, or a 4-year-old that's sleeping in their own room and not liking it. Having that pet with them gives them something to hold and it grounds them. So it's very important that they have all of these things to sleep well. And then you're going to find you've got a kid the next day that's not as cranky
Mm.
and not as short fused. And it lets them know that you understand what they need.
And sleep is so pivotal. When someone comes into my office and they're depressed or anxious, the first thing I
Yes.
just ask them is, "Are you sleeping? Are you eating?" All these things do matter, and having that environmental protection force, I think, is huge. Yeah, I mean, the majority of cases that come to me, for therapy are more so kids who are being visited by, what you would call trap spirits. I think a lot of their light attracts some of the confused or trapped, spirits. So is there also like a lot of psychic self-defense, for kids, or your any thoughts that you have?
Yeah.
It seems like kids are great
This
magnetic
is
forces for
this
that.
is important for you to know being a therapist.
Yeah.
When you have kids that only see dark or
Mm.
the trapped,
Mm.
they're attracted to that child's energy. So that
Mm.
means something's going on in that child's life in the physical world.
Mm.
Sometimes they're victimized by somebody in their family. There could be molestation. Victim energy is a very low frequency. So low
Mm.
frequencies will be attracted to it. Children who have parents that are in dark fields, like homicide, if that parent talks about it too much around the house, the child's energy drops and they start attracting that energy. I think the reason I attracted these funny old men that played poker is because I was sort of like an old person when I was born and they vibed with the energy. I had a frequency that drew a lot of the light to me.
Mm.
And you'll find with the kids that you counsel, if they're seeing their grandparents and trying to make sense of people that they feel, but they don't know who it is, but they don't feel like they're there to hurt them, those are higher frequency children, and that's easier to make sense out of. Although I did have this one kid's mom, and this was a long time ago, like 15 years ago, but she emailed me and she said he always dreams about dark things, people jumping off the bridge, suicides, like really dark stuff for a 9-year-old. And something told me to ask her this question. I said, "What do you do?" And she said, "I'm a 911 operator." And I said, "When you come home, what do you do?" And she's like, "I get on the phone with my girlfriend and I download my day." I'm like, "Where's your son?" She said, "He's sitting next to me at the kitchen table." I'm like, "You need to stop doing that." Because it's giving him these dark images that children's souls aren't really prepared for. They're not prepared to deal with it, and it lowers their frequency and they start drawing dark things. So what the child was saying, what she thought he was seeing, premonitions of things yet to happen, were actually things that happened that the mother was repeating. So you have to look at the environment around that child as to why the darkness, why all the dark content. Some of them had a dad that committed suicide. That lowers the child's energy as well. They've been subjected to the crying, the mourning, the loss, the need for connection, and their frequency lowers. So they're more susceptible to draw in suicides of people who've passed of suicide, because that's what they are putting out. And so, yeah, I don't know if that helps you with your young clients, but as far as determining that, that's got to be done first before you can put in place the borders and boundaries for the child. One important thing you can tell the parents to do is let the child go through pictures of family members until they find a picture of one that they feel good about and connect to, and then put that picture up of them as a child, that person as a child. So around the age of the child that is having trouble, so they can relate to that child image, not a crypt keeper picture from, when they were 82, like the last picture taken. So you're going to do that so they know they're not alone. Then they say to the other side, "Please block any negative or mischievous entities that come near me or my family." And when they say that and they put that out there to their loved ones, that person becomes their guide and throws a wall up of energy around the child and the family. Parents can also say this if they want to also set a protection boundary in their household. But borders and boundaries are key with any sensitive. If you have no borders and boundaries, you're going to get bombarded by the worst of the worst. This is why I don't have that problem. I have boundaries with the living and I have them with the dead. So they know there's certain times they can talk to me, and there's other times that I'm with my family and I'm off limits.
That's so pivotal in any line of work, to develop those degree of boundaries. But you really just unloaded quite a big insight, because I guess a lot of people just think because something is negative, all of a sudden it's schizophrenia or it's
Right.
something pathologized, and it's not all that black and white. Not
No.
just because you're tapping into something negative, could be like in a law of an attraction kind of thing. So this is, I know, going to be groundbreaking for myself and many of my viewers, and be able to identify if it's a mental health thing,
Right.
or if it's another side thing. I think
Well,
is
and to
important.
that point, mental health, if they have mental health issues, again, low frequency.
Mm,
The mentally ill are easier for the other side to get through to because they lack the borders and boundaries. So they're going to draw the earthbounds and the dark, because it almost carries the same energy as a victim. Mental health carries the same energy as a victim as far as frequency goes, and they're very easy to access. So I feel so bad for people who are mentally ill, because they have no defense, because they don't know or are incapable of putting them up in order to protect themselves, depending on how far down the rabbit hole they are with mental illness. Drugs make it so much worse. I wish they'd stop over medicating children. There are a lot of children that are just sensitives that they throw labels on at a young age, and then they're brought up shamed, like they're
I was I
broken.
I was certainly one of them. I was on the Stevie Nicks drug. I was on Klonopin at a very young age. Luvox, Strattera, all that. Maybe it was like 9 or 10 years old. But if you look at psychiatry, it's the one profession that doesn't study what exactly it's treating.
Right.
Cardiologists will look at a heart, podiatrists will look at a foot.
Yeah.
Psychiatry does not actually look at the brain. It's not functional. It's more so, if anything, at best destabilized, but doesn't go to the direct root. And that's a whole other can of worms
How
with
do they not
other
do brain
high.
scans for like the frontal temporal lobe to see if that's functioning? Or you would think that would be
You
important.
you would think. I mean, the only guy that I know that does this is Dr. Daniel Amen, who's on frequently, I saw as a kid on PBS, but you would think that every single doctor, my brother's a podiatrist, he can't treat a patient without looking at their foot. So it makes no sense.
Right.
I mean, I'm in the field, and I also think that we should have mediums working conjunctively with therapists. I think that would be great. Um,
Yes.
I hopefully that's the new format, but just,
Capable mediums,
yeah,
mediums that can articulate
yeah,
what's,
evidential, not,
you know,
85 to 90% of frauds.
even
Yeah.
with the evidential ones, they don't
Right.
always have it in childhood, so they don't know what the children need,
Right.
So
Right. Right.
that's why I made the course for children and parents. I walked that path as a child, and I have the intelligence to be able to articulate what is needed in order. I also have instant recall. So I can recall things from childhood as though it's happening for the first time. I can see the room. I could see everything specifically the way it was and how I felt. So it
Mhm.
made it easier for me to put together this course for them. And I've noticed with a lot of mediums, personalities, oh my gosh,
They're a
we're
little bit
just,
flat, and they can't. I mean, I know for you, you're a brilliant Aquarian, you're an air sign, you're a humanitarian, but you just know how to, you have a great grasp of the English language for sure. You know how to
thank you.
express yourself, but
I
a
feel
lot of
like
these people, they're very
I'm
flat.
here for this. I was
Yeah.
born for this. I accept it. Some people say, "Oh my gosh, that must be like a nightmare. It's like a curse." I'm like, no. Actually, I feel bad for people that can't talk to dead people. What a boring life.
Right. No, I mean, and Tom, your friend, we're going to bring on, but your sun is in Aquarius, your moon is Taurus, right? And Mars
Hmm.
and Aries. So it just seems like it was very scripted, like Aquarius rules, the zodiac, if you will, and Taurus is
Yeah.
very grounding. So you
Yeah.
bring a lot of this down
I
to
needed that
earth.
moon in
Uh,
Taurus.
yeah, 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 that's
And
important.
the
Yeah,
Mars and Aries, that Mars is how you act and react. That's what an astrologer is looking at Mars for. And with it in Aries, I react as a warrior.
right.
So I take on challenges that a lot of other people wouldn't want to take on, and people may not like how I do it because Aries can be aggressive, but I'm a Libra rising, so
Uh,
my Libra keeps my Aries in check most of the time.
but then you add Gen X to it, and then you just don't care. You
Well,
grew up in a
we were told sticks and stones, sticks
uh,
and stones may break your bones, but names will never hurt you. And now they're like, names hurt more than broken bones. I'm like, I do not know what world I'm living
right.
in right now. It's just
It's
crazy,
a
but
different time frame, but you
it's a
just don't care. Yeah.
different and different generations react differently as well
Mhm,
because Gen X, they didn't medicate us like that.
mhm,
They put us in sports.
mhm.
So I probably would have been diagnosed ADHD at the time when I was a kid. I mean, I've seen some kids who are diagnosed that. I'm like, if you are, I definitely was.
Mhm.
They put me in skating. I skated 7 days a week. I was a competitive skater, and it took I'd skate 9 hours on Saturdays and
Wow.
9 hours on Sundays. And I skated before school if I was training for nationals, and I skated after school until dinner time, in the rink. And so I was constantly there. And I think that was the healthiest thing that could have
Mhm,
been done for me because it allowed me to disconnect from the dead
mhm,
and the psychic pulling impressions because music was on in the rink,
mhm,
distracting my brain, and I was able to exercise my body and work out angst.
mhm.
And I find that's what a lot of kids do need, but they throw pills at them instead. I don't get it.
The
I mean, I
parenting right
do
now.
get it. We get it. We get it. It's big pharma. They don't really want
Yeah,
us to
that
be healed here. I mean,
that
come
too, and
on.
it's just parents, I think, now would rather be liked than to do
Yeah.
what's right,
Yeah.
and they're just Charmin software. They just wanna make things easiest for the kid, and they just can't allow them to understand the value of elasticity and sometimes stretching yourself, and that how that could relate to resilience and
Yeah.
resolve versus everything just solve 1, 2, 3. There's no, resistance, in life.
They destroyed a lot of your generation. If I had $1 for every mother I read now that's like, when is my 43-year-old son gonna move out? I'm like, never. This is what you
Mhm.
did. You created that.
enabled and
Yes.
accommodated and all that.
The husband leaves the
Yeah.
picture, so they make the son the husband figure in the household, not
Mm,
sexually, but like as the man of the house, and
mm,
they give them that kind of power, but they don't grow up. They have arrested development because their mom treats them like a child.
yeah.
And so they're both getting something they need, but it's destroying the young person that was there who could have prospered and done something great and walked their path because they had a parent that didn't want their son mad at them, that they'd
Mm.
rather destroy him. I don't get it.
Makes no sense. And the world will continually to revolve around the sun. And each year, you're not growing another year. You're not evolving another
No.
year. You're going to
Yeah.
be stagnant. And that's
No, you know what they say? The moms
unfortunate.
say, when is he going to meet someone? When is he going to get married, move out? I'm like,
Mm.
never. You ruined him for all women. Like it's never happening. My
So
God.
those aren't my Jewish parents that just say that. Those are a lot of people.
Yes, your
Uh,
Jewish parents are wise.
but I also wanted to bring a part of your book that mentions something with the picture. In terms of like looking at a picture of a young child.
So, see, when I look at pictures, I see a blueprint of the person. I see their
Mm,
soul, basically, like what they were made of. So, I like pictures. That's how I connect with
mm,
victims. That's how I would connect with them to get to the perpetrator. But if it's somebody that you had a really close relationship with in life and there's no unfinished business, I've found from my clients, it's easy for them to keep the connection. It's easy for them to get the signs and to have the visits when they sleep and to maintain that because they had such a close relationship in life. If it's somebody that you weren't close to, that's harder.
mm,
If it's somebody that wasn't emotionally available to people in life, they're not going to have as much there to draw from for a medium in death to pull their energy and make that connection because they didn't live. They lived for everyone else, which is what I caution people about now. I'm like, don't live for everyone else. Live for yourself and the people you love. These other people won't be at your funeral, so why do you care what they think? People give their power away way too easily these
mm,
days. I hope that comes to an abrupt stop.
mm,
But as far as wanting that connection, I'll read somebody that says, I feel like my grandfather's around me, but I didn't know him that well because he died when I was 2. Well, he's watched that girl grow up her whole life and he's loved her. They're loving us the whole time that we have no memories being made with them and they're on the other side. They're a part of every car accident we have. They're a part of every time we're sick, every time we cry. They get pulled to us. So they feel very connected to us. It's about teaching the living how to connect to them. They're usually not the problem.
mm. So this is, in other words, like we are their heaven. I know that's a
Yeah.
book of yours, and the lives
Yes.
that we live, they're connected to. And I think a lot of people question, is there life after, their loved one's death? But I think it's finding life after their death. And it seems like you would recommend living for them, like just like what you did with your dad, like, doing the dance competition, kind
Yeah.
of continuously doing the things that they were passionate about. And I
Yeah.
think that's important.
It makes them happy. They want us to go to their favorite restaurant and share a meal with them. They want us talking about them. They love to hear about themselves. It's so funny. They love hearing about themselves. So the more stories told during the holidays about them, the happier they are. Raise your glass, toast to them, save them a chair. These are the things that make them feel part of the family still. And they always come through and they do say, they're like, I'm still part of the family, especially children. They're like, I'm still part of the family. Don't talk about me like I'm not part of the family. So I think it's important for people to remember they hear what we say, they see what we say, they're a part of our lives. And I include my dad in my life in the things that
Mm,
I do. And I don't think it's morbid at a wedding to put up a happy picture of each of the people that you wish were there physically, but are there in spirit. I think it's a beautiful thing. It's adding this positive energy in a blessing, in a sense, to the wedding, to the couple. So what some people see as morbid, I see differently. When I
mm,
say the word dead, some people are like, oh my God, dead. If you Google it and have dead in
mm,
anything, they shut down how many people can get to your information because that's offensive. I'm like, why is that offensive? They're more alive than we are. They always say that. We claim to be living and we fail to do so. most of the time. And I think what the dead are trying to teach us is not to waste the time we have, because you never know when it's going to run out. So I just don't know how, other than speaking to people that do what you do, and they have podcasts and have reach, and my podcast and writing books, I'm trying to reach as many people as I can, and just hope people start living for themselves, put down Instagram. You shouldn't be on it 9 hours a day. That should be a diagnosis of some sort of psychological issue.
It may be, yeah.
And go roller skating, go to the movies, go do something stupid. Make a list of things you want to do while you're here, because you're creating your heaven in the physical world. Once you die, if you failed to live, there's not a lot there. You know, that's why some people will go back to childhood. It's when they'll say it was before there were too many responsibilities.
That's why, while we're alive, it's a great responsibility to be alive while we're alive. Like, so many people are just vegetables and just, they have no life force. And
Right.
it seems like that's a big emphasis of your life. And I know you truly live that, where, you help out so many people, but you are able to enjoy all things. You really have a big love for life. That's what I
Yeah.
definitely get from you.
I think I enjoy it more than most people.
Yeah.
I had stupid things on my list, my living list, really. And I wanted to eat a bowl of Lucky Charms in Ireland. I made a promise to myself when I was 11. I would do it when I grew up. I looked at the cereal box. I'm like, I'm going to go to Ireland and eat Lucky Charms. And I did. I kept that promise to my child self. And I wanted to roll down a hill of clovers. I did not do it gracefully, but I did it. So I wanted to drink champagne overlooking the Eiffel Tower. I did that. Like, my things revolve around food because I'm a moon in Taurus. So
I as a sun in Taurus, I wholeheartedly hear you.
So you understand. You understand.
I get it. Yeah.
So people can make lists that you don't need other people's approvals, that it's an okay list. Do what you want to do. Do what makes you happy, what makes you laugh, what means something to you, and stop worrying about what means something to other people, because those people, I guarantee, live for everyone else, and not to help them, but to get their approval. I don't live for people's approval. I stay true to myself, and that's how I'll continue to live. So
that is the number one regret. If they ask people who are about to pass away in hospice, like, what's the biggest regret that you had? That you were someone else's version of yourself, and you were constantly trying to satisfy something that you would never reach. So that is so important, to live, on your own terms and not for someone else's approval. Very
totally
Aquarian.
agree. Well, that's true. We're the rebel of the zodiac. What do you want? People are like, behave. I'm like, I'm the rebel of the zodiac. I'm not gonna behave. Like, I'm not wired that way.
Do you have any other projects or things that you? Maybe we could bring you on for that, but
sure.
Whatever. Yeah.
Deaduniversity.com is where my school is. I'm the head mistress of Dead University, and we have mediumship, astrology, healing courses, and earth magic. If you want to learn any of those, we have different colleges with different professors that are the best in their field that will teach you how to do that to the best of your ability, which I love. The children's course is also going up on deaduniversity.com and AllisonDuBois.com for information on me. And if you want to book a reading, just email booking@AllisonDuBois.com. So
Allison DuBois, you're welcome anytime to come back on. We love having you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Happy new moon.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Wow. Thank you all for tuning in to episode number 11. That was a wonderful interview. Allison matched the life path, number 11, life that she lives. I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did, and maybe got some insights and wisdom. Please do check out Allison's, podcast, The Dead Life, as well as Dead University, and all of her courses, which is very eclectic and broad-based, from astrology to Wiccan practice to mediumship. She just covers it all. So thank you for tuning in to episode 11. Next week, we're going to have Stuart Pearce. Stuart Pearce has worked with world leaders such as the late Princess Diana. He's a fascinating spiritual teacher and intuitive as well. But until then, this is Jacob Cooper signing off for you. Love to all. Let's keep on growing the ladder. And I hope and I know you took a lot out of today's interview with Allison DuBois, an incredible medium and spiritual teacher. So thank you all. Keep in touch. Keep on climbing the ladder and growing and expanding. And we'll see you next week. Love to all. Thank you.